Hi everyone, my name is Wayne St. Amand, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Nielsen's Visual IQ business unit. I'm also excited to be joined by our guest speaker today, Susan Bidel, who is a Senior Analyst with Forrester. It's our pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar. I have a few details to cover before we begin. I want to let you know that we will be recording the webinar and making it available to everyone who registered. We'll also take your questions during a Q&A session at the end, but you can certainly submit your questions at any time using the webinar interface. So please do send us those questions as you think of them. All right, it's time to get started. Today, we'll be exploring the topic of consumer identity. There's no question that the concepts of identity and audience centricity have become central to the success of both the execution and measurement of most modern marketing practices. And we're thrilled to cover this theme with you today. Susan is up first and will be offering Forrester's perspective and research on this hot topic. I'll then come in and dive a little deeper on the concept of audience centricity and marketing effectiveness measurement and attribution specifically. I'll share some of the recommended best practices and requirements for a comprehensive approach. Okay, Susan, if you're ready, let's jump right in.
Indeed. Thanks so much, Wayne.
Thank you.
So today we're going to talk about customer identity at the core of modern marketing, because we truly believe at Forrester that consumers have changed, and they've changed very, very dramatically. Most importantly, from a marketer's perspective, is that they expect relevance. And for a marketer to deliver relevance requires that that marketer know who they are and what their interests in. So today we're going to go briefly through how consumers have changed from the Forrester point of view, what their relationships are with advertising, and it is not what you might expect, all of which puts an advertiser in something of a dilemma, and that dilemma they can solve with identity resolution. So let's get started. How have consumers changed? Historically, marketers would put consumers into age groups. They would divide them by sex. They might divide them by zip codes, and using those data points, they would come up with a profile. But Forrester thinks that consumers have changed very dramatically, and that what you could assume about consumers before based on their age, gender, and income, you can no longer assume. We've devised 5 new buckets for the way to look at consumers, and they vary from progressive pioneers to convenience conformers and all the way to reserve resistors. One thing I would caution you is that if you were applying sort of the old types of intelligence, you might assume that reserve resistors are the oldest people and progressive pioneers are the youngest, and that progressive pioneers would embrace advertising and embrace everything there is to be had, all the benefits of the digital environment, and put up with all of the costs of those benefits. But you can't make those assumptions anymore. You have to understand that consumers truly have changed. So this is an example of how empowered customers or consumers access content. Some of them use physical, like a newspaper or a magazine. Some use only digital. But most commonly, they use both. So take a look at progressive pioneers. If you're thinking that progressive pioneers are the most digitally savvy, you would likely be right, but you can see that they use both methods or both platforms, if you will, to access content. Whereas reserve resistors, for example, use the physical portion only. They have more devices at their disposal than ever before. The total U.S. population has more than 3. devices upon which they access content, and you in the audience are no different from me. I have a laptop computer. I have one for work and one for my personal use. I have an iPad. I have a smartphone. I have a connected TV. So in fact, I exceed the total US pop by having more than 4 devices at my disposal. This represents another set of complications because if consumers are using all those devices to access content, as this chart would suggest, I would suggest that they also use these devices to not choose between content, but to simply add on more content. So, for example, I did a piece of research recently for a radio, an audio service, let's put it that way. And what we learned in the process of that audio service research is that people are not, in fact, choosing streaming audio over traditional sort of land-based radio. They're simply adding streaming to their already existing listening practices, further complicating a marketer's dilemma. And they're shopping. They're shopping during work, which might distress some employers. And they're shopping, more importantly, in the primetime viewing hours, where a marketer might expect to be able to connect with their consumers. So the wrinkle that this presents for marketers is that they have to understand who their consumers are. They have to understand what devices those consumers have at their disposal, what habits consumers are enjoying on those devices, and are they doing it simultaneously? Well, indeed, 64% multitask, as you all have. You watch football, you on a big screen, you whether it's in home or at a bar, for example, you are looking at your phone, you're texting with friends, you're posting to social networks, you're doing it all at the same time. So from a marketer's perspective, the questions come down to who is my customer? What devices are my customers using? What are they using those devices to do? At what times of the day? So that I, as a marketer, have some sense of how to plan my campaigns in order to reach my best customers and prospects, and then to measure how many times I actually have to deliver those ads in order to make an impression with a highly distracted customer base. So indeed, relationships with advertisers are complicated, much more complicated than back in the day. This is a chart that says that whenever people search for the term retargeting, the implementation of, they also search for how to block ads. Now, if you think of your sort of traditional way of looking at your customer base, you might assume that the reserved resistors would be the most frequently, the customer base that would most frequently be blocking ads, because reserve resistors are just sort of cranky, right? But that's not nearly the case. If you look at, this is a comparison between progressive pioneers and reserve resistors and their relationship to advertising, you can see that progressive pioneers really kind of embrace ads on television, and they embrace ads in store. And they, to a lesser extent, but still in the positive territory, they enjoy ads on social networks and indeed in magazines. And then compare that, for example, to reserve resistors who really just don't like ads anywhere. And then they act on those ads. They visit stores, they use search engines to research the advertised product or service. Progressive pioneers are those portions of your audience that really understand the benefits of digital and understand the benefits of traditional platforms, and they try to make the best of both. And they have particular relationships to personalization also. When we did a piece of research recently, we asked the community, what types of brands or companies would you be okay with collecting data from you? And again, progressive pioneers, some say, I'm okay with it, and others say the bottom line is I don't want anybody or any company tracking me. So those are the, as we've seen, the sort of demographic group or customer segment that would be most accepting of the digital environment. Reserve resistors, on the other hand, you might say would really resent any kind of data collection or personalization. And one said, I have mixed emotions, while another, you know, if I'm going to benefit from the data collection, then fine. And another reserve resistor respondent said, I don't want any brands collecting data about me. And what would they not be okay with? So reserve resistors one respondent said, I don't want or like any companies targeting or retargeting me. And another said the most irritating aspect of ads are that they show up on my computer. Whereas progressive pioneers, one responded, I can't think of any brands or companies that I would mind retargeting me. And another said the companies I'm okay with for data collection. This person was extremely explicit, but they would basically say companies that they have a relationship with. So what's an advertiser to do? Where does this, how can an advertiser figure out exactly what their strategy should be in order to connect with their consumers, connect with their best prospects, and quite frankly, sell products and services, because that's what all people in business want to do, right? In this particular chart, what we're basically saying is that marketers need to collect and analyze as much customer data as they possibly can, plan based on that customer data. In other words, try to understand who their customers are to the best of their ability, tailor the media according to the life cycle that customer is in. So identify that Susan is a customer, and then know that Susan is in the search process for a pair of shoes, and then target Susan based on that, and then learn from Susan's behavior so that I can continuously, as a marketer, get smarter about reaching Susan and people who look like Susan and sell my shoes. And you need to do it across all channels, because as we said earlier, consumers are using all channels, they're embracing all channels, and what used to be a simple sort of linear construction about a purchase funnel, that completely blew up when social became as important as it now is. And so what a marketer has to do is know, again, who the consumer is, what they're doing, on what device, at what time, in order to deliver the message with contextual relevance to that consumer about that consumer's interests, and do it across all these channels and measure it. Because consumer journeys, while understanding the consumer, we first need to identify who the consumer is in order to know who the audience segments are. But once you do know that, you can understand what communications touch points will be effective, and in addition, how to tailor the message, right? So you know that Susan is watching a red carpet event. She's using her iPad to shop at the same time, and she's using her phone to text with friends and post on social platforms. And armed with all that knowledge, you can, as a marketer, create ads that cross platforms, that respect the environment in which the ad is going to be delivered, and respect the context and make it relevant to the consumer's experience and interests, so that you can first create segments and then know much more about the individuals that make up your segments. And the way that you do that is with identity resolution. Now, what is identity resolution? It's a four-step process. It starts with collecting identity keys. Now, those identity keys can be a social ID, they can be an email, they can be anonymous browsing data, and a lot of variations within, and I'll go into a little more detail on the next slide as to what those keys can look like. Then you have to link those keys together. You have to have some method of saying, okay, this person who's given me their email address is also is connected to this person's social tag, social ID, and so that I can build as a marketer working with an identity resolution partner. I can connect those identities and add to them behavioral data like the anonymous browsing behavior to get a much richer profile of who that consumer is, so that I can deliver ads that are relevant to that consumer where and when I'm connecting with that consumer. And I can apply that ID across a variety of of marketing use cases. So advertising is the area which commands the largest budget typically. But if you go back to this, you recall the slide saying that had all the different platforms and channels that consumers interact with on a regular basis, and that marketers must execute to and measure performance on. That applies to all those marketing use cases, so that they're connected. And this is a sample of different kinds of IDs that can be derived from multi-channel or single channel or single session that are more or less deterministic. Now, it's the combination of those and putting them together to understand a person's real identity, right? So it's the key, it's whether or not the key is associated with PII. So for example, if the key is social ID, is another key associated that it will be added to, is that person's email address or even a street address or a phone number. And how persistent is it? Is it a cookie that's going to fade over time, or is it an email address or a home address, which is much less likely to change in a short period of time? And then putting it all together, how big is this audience that I'm able to put together? If I'm resting solely on deterministic data, for example, I'm going to find that I have a much smaller audience. I'm going to know a great deal about that audience, but it's going to be a much smaller audience. Now, most marketers would find that they were hampered by limiting the IDs that they were using as a marketing resource to those that they had full identity on. So those at the far right of the screen. At the other end of the screen, it's all inferred identity and highly probabilistic, therefore, and so much less accurate. So that's a trade-off that marketers have to make, right? They have to decide, they have to weigh the importance, the various levels of importance between highly structured, full identity versus inferred identity, and most will come down somewhere in the center with a combination of the two. And this goes back to to the chart, the slide that had the circle in it, right? So you collect data from across all of these sources of data: browser activity, device IDs, third-party data. If you have purchase data, for example, anything that's self-submitted, for example, someone signed up for an email, CRM and loyalty programs, and then you link them. You link those identifiers with anything behavioral that you can see and to any campaign responses that you have been able to track to create the profile that's in the center that you use as your core. You can add new data to it. You can purge expiring data from it. It's important that you dedupe it and that you try to isolate the individual within the household, for example, and you maintain data hygiene so that your identity graph is as current and determined as possible. Then you distribute it. You distribute it for use cases across all of your marketing disciplines, from email to social to CRM, sort of coming back actually in many ways to the places where you collect the data. And then you analyze, you orchestrate, you deliver, and you start over again. This is an example of continuous learning, of getting smarter over time, and learning more and more about your customer, fashioning your customer's behaviors, your customer's interests, your customer's desires, fashioning your marketing outreach to them, from advertising to email, in a coordinated pattern that respects and that, first of all, recognizes and then respects their behaviors, their interests, and so that you form a relationship with them, so that you're not always seen as intruding, so that you understand that if your customer is a progressive pioneer, that you need to form a relationship, for example, with them. They need to see you as a resource that adds to their experience, as opposed to someone or an entity that is simply imposing itself on their experience in the digital environment. So that's the core of identity resolution and the core of modern marketing: understanding who your consumer is in all of their complexity, and then applying that understanding across all of these disciplines, starting with onboarding, really, which is where you take your offline data and make it available in online environments. So I hope that's been informative, and now I will turn it over back to Wayne.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Susan. I think we could probably all agree that that was really great content. I know, at least for me, and hopefully for those who are viewing the webinar today, I think we all understand consumer preferences related to tracking activity far better now. And understanding consumer preferences is so incredibly important as marketers, because we are customizing our efforts for them. And in that vein, the onus is now on us, advertisers and marketers, to do the right thing as we make and we measure all of those media investments. And that's what we're going to talk about next. All right. I always like to start with the concept of why. I'm sure many of you marketers are familiar with Simon Sinek and his concept of starting with why. It's important, I think, to really understand our motivating force as marketers. And that's why we state it here. I think as marketers and advertisers, we're driven to connect and really discover our best performing marketing to the people that matter most. I'm going to read that again because it's important. We're driven to connect our best performing marketing to the people that matter most. However, despite so many advancements in technology, in our approaches and practices, many of us marketers and advertisers, we struggle with this concept and with the actual practice of making it true. And I think much of this struggle has to do with the shifting marketing landscape that we're talking about, and how these major trends and forces are coming together. You know, consumers interact with your brand across a dizzying number of channels and touch points and devices. And they expect a coordinated, personalized experience, right? We heard quite a bit from Susan about this. But these soaring consumer expectations have fully disrupted traditional marketing approaches in a major way. And as we see sort of playing out from left to right on this slide, we see three major forces having a substantial impact on the marketing landscape. The convergence of ad tech and martech to drive unified experiences, and we aren't necessarily talking about the technology platforms together. We think that these will remain individual silos, but getting them to talk to one another, right, is absolutely critical. Also, the focus on actually identifying consumers, being people-based or audience-centric with your marketing. And then finally, on the right, this combination of audience and attribution. You need to be able to measure cross-channel performance by audience segment. You want that audience-centric view of performance, because audiences and ultimately the individuals that make them up are what really matter. So these are sort of the forces that are impacting us all. And obviously, as marketers and advertisers, we've probably all considered the journey that consumers take as they progress toward a given goal or KPI that we have for them. Consumers, they're following this incredibly circuitous route to us, and they experience multiple media touch points leading up to that specific KPI. It could be an online conversion, an offline conversion, a brand engagement goal. There are many, many others. Some of these touch points, as we've identified here on this slide, are what we call addressable. In other words, you know for a fact that a user has been exposed to it. Others are what we call non-addressable. So media like TV or radio, print, outdoor, things of that nature. And understanding what's working and how to assemble the correct mix of tactics in a world with digital, cross-device, and offline components is one of the biggest challenges that we marketers now face. And we need the kind of intelligence as marketers that reduces the complexity of this puzzle. It's important to understand, though, that consumers don't ever envision themselves engaged in a journey, engaged in a consumer or customer journey. They don't care about how you've set up your marketing automation workflow or any other tactic, frankly, that's designed to reach them. At the end of the day, and this is something that Susan touched on as well, at the end of the day, they just want us as marketers to act like we understand them at some level. I find this stat particularly interesting, given the fact that we all have this drive to understand our consumers better and optimize our performance. Only 6% of marketers worldwide say that they have an adequate single view of customers or prospects across all devices and touch points. Yet 90% of them cite it as a top priority. So clearly, we marketers, we have a lot of catching up to do, right? The good news is that with the right kind of measurement solutions, applying that correct audience-centric approach, you can definitely make big progress against this goal. So let's talk a little bit about understanding consumers and the performance of your marketing and doing that in real time, which is incredibly important because I think today consumers change very, very rapidly. And our marketing and our ability to see performance within our marketing or lack of performance has to match that speed. So as much as you can approach real time as possible, you're doing yourself a favor. So obviously the marketing game has changed in fundamental ways. You've seen that so far in my presentation. You certainly have heard a number of factors from Susan as well. And to be successful, we marketers need to target individuals in the real world. And we know that a number of point solutions have evolved in an attempt to achieve this vision, but they operate in silos, requiring marketers to connect all of the dots within impossibly large data sets. And all of these point solutions tend to lack the comprehensive insight required to meet today's growing requirements. Marketers need the ability to combine the profile data they have about their customers and prospects, things like who they are, what they're like, what they want, where they are, with marketing performance data, things about related to the experience, the creative, the offer, the imagery, possibly return on ad spend, cost per acquisition, frequency, things like this, to provide a consolidated view of the consumer and every marketing interaction leading up to a given success criteria or your business KPI. That could be something like engagement, some measure of engagement, or conversion, or an in-store visit. There are literally hundreds of different KPIs that you could be sort of judging your performance against. So when you combine the power of this audience understanding, this audience centricity with attribution in a single real-time view, you can then understand consumer attributes and how different audiences interact with your brand across channels and across devices. And you can optimize budgets and create the types of relevant, personalized experiences to drive those meaningful business results. And this is what becomes a powerful enabler of super efficient, high performance, audience-centered marketing. What you're really going for, ultimately, and I think Susan mentioned this as well, is an omni-channel view of the consumer journey. But unfortunately, what many marketers have to deal with is the top half of this slide, right? It is a sort of zigzag pattern where you have multiple untracked elements because you have blind spots that exist in your view of the consumer journey, where some of the touch points or conversion events, they can't be collected. And this leads you to an incomplete understanding of the consumer, and more importantly, an incomplete understanding of the performance of your marketing, because no tactic should really hardly ever be taken by itself, considered by itself. You need to understand the fractional performance of the entire mix of your marketing efforts. And the more blind spots you have in that consumer journey, the less illuminated the entire path is, the less accurate your view is going to be, and the less optimized you can actually ultimately be with your marketing efforts. What you really want is what you see sort of on the bottom half of this slide, which is a complete view with few, if any, untracked elements. If you approach attribution in the right way, your vendor is likely going to have adapters that get access to that data, that channel that data into the system that serves as a hub and provide a complete view of the consumer journey. And the more data you have, the better quality it is, the more it relies on actual observed person-based behavior, the more accurate your optimizations are going to be. And the better you're going to be as a marketer at curating this omni-channel consumer experience. So this idea of no blind spots or as few blind spots as you possibly can have is absolutely vital as you consider how you're going to gather this data and how you're going to build your audience-centric view of performance so that you get those insights and so that you can drive the optimizations you need to have an impact on the business. No webinar, I think, is complete without a small commercial moment, and this webinar has one here. Obviously at Nielsen and as part of Nielsen Visual IQ, we have a robust set of marketing effectiveness solutions. You know, our comprehensive marketing effectiveness solutions, such as our Nielsen Visual IQ platform, which is pictured here, work to combine the power of diverse analytic approaches with the world's most complete audience-centered marketing performance data from Nielsen. So every member of your team, from channel managers and data analysts to media planners and agency partners, can get the fast, reliable insights they need to inform their decision making. And all of these results are delivered via an intuitive web-based interface, and you and your team will get instant access to the consistent reporting and the right type of analysis needed to support really any marketing decision without making the trade-offs that are associated with less complete approaches, or more importantly, and more germane to this presentation, approaches that don't have that person-based audience centricity that is so important to your optimization efforts and to your into gaining the right kind of marketing intelligence that you need to perform those things. As we move forward, you know, all of this can feel in many respects kind of theoretical, right? We've talked a lot about the kinds of solutions that are available, the kinds of approaches, consumer preferences as it relates to tracking, or maybe not preferences, but tolerances as it relates to tracking of their behaviors. But what are marketers doing in the real world, right? How are marketers benefiting from this idea of audience-centric multi-touch attribution? And Nielsen Visual IQ has had the benefit of being in the market for more than a decade now and working with some of the best and biggest brands in the world to really help them optimize their marketing efforts using attribution approaches. So I think many of us certainly have heard of or maybe even worked with H&R Block on our taxes and finances. And for H&R Block, their goals are all about conversions and the marketing intelligence that helps them to make sure that their creative and their media investment is maximized both online and driving towards in-store transactions. If we move down to Cancer Treatment Centers of America, so using MTA, Cancer Treatment Centers of America was able to better understand the interplay of digital with TV to show the value of their full mix of activities rather than single channels in isolation. And using this, they were able to make the case for increased digital investment, specifically social, because of its beneficial impact on other media spend to drive hospital inquiries. As we look at Petco, obviously very popular national retailer, so without multi-touch attribution, Petco had trouble understanding how their marketing tactics were impacting the consumer journey for the varying audience segments that they address. And they had trouble tailoring it for the highest impact. By turning on MTA, implementing that technology, the people, the process, and the technology required for a successful MTA implementation, they were able to turn those things around and get the required understanding to optimize those efforts and produce the business outcomes that they were looking for. So again, we're here back again, right? Back to our driving motivation as marketers. And, you know, I would make the argument that attribution or MTA allows us to discover and connect our best performing marketing with the people that matter most. And again, if you do it right, if you take the right approach, you can do that in real time or darn close to it. And it's that actionability and timeliness of the data that are such vital elements when you're considering your marketing measurement and your marketing optimization approaches. We've covered a lot of material here today, but I would say that we've probably still only scratched the surface. We'd certainly like to invite you, if you'd like, to go deeper on this specific theme. We'd like to invite you to visit our resource center, available at visualiq.com, and download our latest ebook, Crossing the New Digital Divide. While you're there, you can also view lots of customer case studies, videos, best practices content. If you're so inclined, you can even request a demo of our platform. Hopefully, again, we've just scratched the surface, but hopefully there's interest there, and we can certainly set you up with a customized online demo to explore the particulars of our platform and learn even more. All right, Susan, I think we are at that point now where we are going to progress to the Q&A session. So again, I'd like to remind everyone that if you have a question, you can submit that question online using the webinar interface. Let's just take a moment and see what questions come in. We are starting to get a few, which is good. Okay. I think we've got enough to start, and we probably have about 5 or 6 minutes to get through some of these questions. So Susan, it looks like the first question that's here is a good one for you. So we'll start. Are you off mute?
I am.
Okay, fantastic. All right, I'll go ahead and read it out for you. This person asks, I'm interested in identity resolution, but it's complex. What's a good way to get started so it doesn't drown me?
So I think the best way to get started is to look around your own organization and identify all the first-party data that you have in your organization. Because that's your core resource. So you may have a loyalty program, you may have an email program. People have signed up to receive emails from you. You may have a social team that has first-party data. Look around your organization, identify all the pockets of first-party data, and then look at how all that first-party data has been collected. Are you using the same protocol across all those databases? So, for example, do you have Susan in one database as Bidel Susan at abc.com, and is it possible that S Bidel at Forrester.com is the same person? You need to reconcile all your databases, make them uniform in protocol, or in other words, cleanse them, and only that way will you be able to dedupe them and have a real sense of what your core asset is, with which you will build your identity graph.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Susan. We do have another question that's come in, and I think I'd be happy to take this one. It says, your examples are B2C. How does MTA differ, or does it, in a B2B environment? Well, you know, it's a great question, and oftentimes attribution is used more for B2C marketing organizations rather than B2B marketing organizations, because B2B organizations tend to have a tighter or better relationship with directly with their customer. their CRM systems and all the tracking that can take place in B2B environments makes it a little bit easier to gain the kinds of insights you would normally use an attribution platform to gather. So we definitely do have a bit of a bias towards larger B2C organizations where the client may not have a direct relationship with the consumer. But we do have examples within our customer base of large B2B organizations that have both B2B and B2C components of their marketing. So we do see it in both places. We'd be happy to, again, provide a demo of the platform and sort of address specific questions that you may have to give you a better sense of whether or not it would work for your B2B environment, or if you'd be better suited to a different approach. Okay, there are definitely additional questions. Actually, there's another question that's similar, and I think, Susan, this one is probably a good for you to address, specific to your advice that you applied earlier in the presentation, Susan. Does your advice apply to all B2C business verticals?
Yes, I can't see that knowing who your customer is wouldn't be an advantage no matter what the vertical. It is just that there are some verticals that are more endowed with first-party data than other verticals, and so getting started and being successful in actually crafting an identity would be would come to hand more easily. So I think of financial services and travel and retail, for example, where they can tie some of those dots in the dotted lines that you showed, Wayne, in your slide, and can know, for example, that they served Susan an ad and then see that Susan made an online purchase. They can tie that together much better than Coca-Cola, for example, that may have served Susan 1 or 400 ads, but they have no actual evidence that Susan went anywhere and bought a soda.
Got it. That's very true, very interesting. Okay, we do have some additional questions that have come in, and we probably have about 2 more minutes. So this question feels like it's probably better for me. This person is asking, what are the biggest challenges implementing MTA, and how long does it take to start seeing results? The way I would answer that is that MTA is a large and complex process, and it is not just a technology process. There's people, there's process, and there's technology involved in the implementation. Measuring in this way, in many respects, requires a bit of a cultural shift within the organization, because last touch, which is, hey, listen, last touch is better than no attribution methodology, but it doesn't give you very much information at all, and it certainly doesn't build any kind of sense of who your audience is at the other end of that last touch. Unlike last touch, which is so prevalent in our industry as marketers, there is no silo, right? MTA is about breaking down those silos, and it's about viewing all of your results and how the interplay of your marketing and advertising mix impacts the overall outcome of your marketing performance against KPIs that you care about. So this requires a different kind of thinking in addition to the technology implementation that's involved. And then in terms of how long it takes for clients to start seeing results, it's typically about a 3-month process of implementation, some services hand-holding before you start to see complete pictures, complete results, and before you have the data that you need to start optimizing. As I said, it is complex, people, process, and technology involved, but we see clients that literally create millions of dollars in efficiencies across their marketing spend. And that kind of investment, that kind of return on investment makes the effort worthwhile from our perspective. Okay, let's see. We've got some additional questions that have come in. Just take a look here. Okay, we've got another question. This is related to, I think, my comments on real time. So I'll take this one, Susan. You mentioned being able to view insights in near real time. What does that mean? I thought you could only collect data on a weekly or monthly cadence. I think the misperception, honestly, about attribution is that you are collecting data fairly infrequently and modeling it for optimization, for both understanding and optimization on a fairly infrequent basis, perhaps every few weeks or monthly or quarterly. And it absolutely, there are players out there that do that. It's not what we would recommend. We think marketers have to operate at the speed of digital, and that includes measurement and the models that drive your understanding of what's happening. So for us, real time is about collecting the data on a daily basis and actually running our attribution algorithms, the models, every day. So that when you're running your optimizations, especially on things that change almost moment to moment, things like your search engine marketing, your search spend, which is often very substantial, you can be optimizing your search media on a daily basis, which often does happen, right? And you want to make sure that your optimization data isn't a week old or a month old, because every day that passes means you're introducing more noise into that model and reducing your true understanding of what's happening, introducing more noise into the system. And you want to be acting on signal, right? So real time for us is about daily data collection and daily actual modeling of that data and basing our optimization suggestions and our measurement insights on that remodeled daily data. So that's what we mean when we say real time. So Susan, actually looking up now at the time, I think we are at time. So I'd like to thank you very much, Susan, for being our guest speaker today. Fantastic insights. I know I learned a lot. I hope everyone in the audience did as well. And I'd like to extend my thanks to everyone who registered and attended today's webinar. We'll certainly be in touch in the weeks to come with new webinars and new topics, and we'll hope that you will join us again. Thanks, everyone.